Halo anak-anak, seri video kali ini akan membahas tips persiapan Math Selection Test untuk Asean Scholarship. Sebelumnya, kalian perlu mengetahui aturan untuk Math Selection Test ini yang dapat dilihat di website resmi MUI.
Kalau kita pergi ke website resmi MUI, lalu kita lihat bagian FAQ, terutama tentang Asean Scholarship, maka kita akan menemukan aturan tentang tesnya, terutama untuk tes matematika. Nah, di sini kita bisa lihat untuk tes matematika, waktunya adalah 2 jam, dan tesnya terdiri atas soal-soal yang membutuhkan short answer questions, dan open-ended questions. Kemudian tidak boleh menggunakan kalkulator. Lalu di sini juga ditulis bahwa jawabannya itu harus ditulis langkah-langkahnya, ya, must write their working steps selain jawaban akhir. Jadi tidak cukup kalau hanya jawaban akhir saja. Kemudian apa maksudnya open-ended questions? Nah, open-ended questions itu biasanya lebih panjang dan lebih kompleks. Dan nanti kita akan lihat di slide berikutnya apa yang dimaksud dengan open-ended questions. Jadi, open-ended questions itu adalah lawan dari closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions adalah pertanyaan yang hanya memiliki satu jawaban yang benar. Contoh, berapakah 8 dikurangi 3? Hanya satu jawaban yang benar, yaitu 5. Open-ended questions memiliki lebih dari satu jawaban yang benar. Contoh, tunjukkan bahwa 8 dikurangi 3 sama dengan 5. Nah, ini kita bisa memikirkan banyak kemungkinan jawaban. Misalnya di sini saya beri 3 contoh, ya. Contoh jawaban pertama, kita bisa menggambar 8 batang lidi, lalu kita hapus 3 lidi atau kita coret, maka sisanya tinggal 5 batang lidi, ya, kira-kira seperti ini gambarnya. Atau jawaban lain yang juga benar, kalau tidak suka menggambar, maka kita bisa menggunakan simbol-simbol matematika. Jadi karena kita tahu bahwa 8 itu adalah 5 ditambah 3, maka kita bisa menulis 8 dikurangi 3 itu adalah 5 ditambah 3 dikurangi 3. Dan kita tahu bahwa 3 dikurangi 3 itu 0. Jadi 5 ditambah 0 itu sama dengan 5. Nah, ini juga cara yang benar. Atau jawaban yang benar yang lain adalah dengan menggunakan sempoa atau abakus, ya. Jadi kita bisa di sempoa itu kita tarik 8 biji ke kiri, kemudian kita ambil 3 biji kita tarik ke kanan, maka kita bisa lihat sisanya di sebelah kiri tinggal 5 biji. Nah, masih banyak kemungkinan jawaban yang lain, ya, tergantung kreativitas kita dalam menjawab. Nah, ini adalah contoh open-ended questions.
Sebaiknya selalu mengunjungi website resmi MUI untuk mengetahui informasi terbaru dan juga mungkin ada perubahan aturan. Untuk video pertama kali ini kami akan membahas beberapa soal ujian Matematika Primary 5 Singapura untuk memberikan gambaran seperti apa sih ujian sekolah Primary 5 di Singapura. Video akan dibawakan dalam bahasa Inggris. Video-video yang berikutnya akan membahas contoh-contoh soal ujian matematika Primary 6 dan PSLE untuk memberi gambaran bagi entry level Secondary 1. Sedangkan untuk entry level Secondary 3 akan dibahas soal-soal matematika Secondary 1, Secondary 2, dan O-level. Ada beberapa hal yang perlu diperhatikan. Yang pertama, untuk soal-soal yang dibahas dalam video ini ada beberapa bagian yang boleh menggunakan kalkulator. Tapi nanti saat selection test Asean Scholarship tidak boleh menggunakan kalkulator. Yang kedua, pada contoh soal dalam video ini juga ada yang berupa soal pilihan berganda. Nanti di saat selection test Asean Scholarship juga tidak ada soal pilihan berganda.
Hello everyone, today we'll be taking a look at the primary school examination, Primary 5, by Anglo-Chinese School Junior. And just a quick introduction on Singapore primary school examinations. For mathematics, it'll be split into two types of paper. Paper 1, where you're not allowed to use a calculator, and paper 2, where you are allowed to use a calculator. And for each type of paper, there'll be booklet A and booklet B, as you can see here. So booklet A is multiple choice questions, while for booklet B, we do SAQ, or short answer questions. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the questions, and just a quick look at questions 1 to 4. You can notice that these questions are actually a bit simple, and that's usually the standard where the first three questions of the paper are the more doable questions. You can see here that question 1 and 2 is actually just testing the basic order of operations. But for today, we're only going to take a look at one of the multiple choice question, which is question 15 for paper 1. And let's take a look at what this question is asking. This is about two machines that can print sheets of paper within an amount of time. So the first machine, machine A, can print 80 sheets of paper in 40 seconds, while the second machine, machine B, can print 30 sheets of paper in 20 seconds. So I'm just going to write that down first. Machine A can print 80 sheets of paper in 80 seconds. So I'm going to write down that in 40 seconds, 80 sheets of paper can be printed. While for machine B, in 20 seconds, 30 sheets can be printed. And the question is actually asking how many sheets of paper can be printed if we start both machines at the same time and we print all together in 6 minutes. And how we're going to do this question is firstly we're going to find out how many sheets of paper can each of the machines print in 6 minutes. And to do that, we first need to convert this 6 minutes into seconds, because notice that right now we're dealing with seconds only. So just a recap on how to convert from minutes to seconds is we multiply by 60. So 1 minute is 60 seconds, and 6 minutes would be 6 times 60 seconds, which is just 360 seconds. So basically our goal here is we want to find out how many sheets of paper can machine A print in 360 seconds, and how many sheets of paper can machine B print in 360 seconds. And how we're going to find this number here is we're going to find out how did we get from 40 seconds to 360 seconds. And if you're quite quick, you'll notice that we actually need to multiply by 9. And how we get this 9 is actually from 360 divided by 40. Divided by 40. This is equals to 9. So notice that this is a multiplication of 9. And to get the number of sheets is we apply the same idea to the right side, which is we also multiply by 9. And just a reminder, we're not allowed to use our calculators in this paper. So this will test you a bit on your manual calculations. But if you calculate correctly, you'll get 720 sheets. So basically, in 360 seconds, machine A can print 720 sheets. But what about machine B? And this one's a bit different. We go from 20 seconds to 360 seconds. And again, how we're going to find out how much we multiply this by is we do 360 divided by 20. And that will give us 18. So this is actually a multiplication by 18. And we do the same for the right hand side, and we'll eventually get 550 sheets. So this 540 comes from 30 sheets multiplied by 18. And the final answer is actually just the addition of these two, because the question is asking how many sheets of paper can both machines print altogether. So the answer is 720 plus 540, which is 1,260 sheets. That is option 3. Okay, so now let's move on to booklet B, which is the short answer questions. And we're also going to only go through a few of the questions. And you can take a look a bit at the examples of the questions. We have um, testing of how to round numbers into the nearest hundred, and geometry as well, which is finding the area of a triangle. For today, we're actually going to look at this question here, question 19. So primary 5, by primary 5 in Singapore, you would already have learned some concepts of geometry, and we learned some of the shapes. So one of the shapes we learned is parallelogram. We also learn about rectangles, squares, and the different types of triangles. And just to recap, a parallelogram will have the property of having two parallel sides, two pairs of parallel sides. So we have BC, which is parallel to ED. This is one pair. And we also have BE, which is parallel to CD. So this is another pair. And okay, so let's take a look at the question here. Basically, the idea of the question is we want to find out what this T is. And we're going to use the property of parallelogram, which is opposite sides will always have equal values. So B and D will have the same value, and angle C and angle E will also have the same value. So I'm just going to write that down. EBC is equals to EDC, and BED is equals to BCD. So if you're interested in this, you can take a look in the search online about more about Singapore primary geometry and what they learn. But this is an important property of the parallelogram. So now using this property, we can find out that angle EDC is actually also 95 degrees. So I'm just going to write that down because these two are equals to one another. Angle B and angle B are both equal. So angle EDC is equals to 95 degrees. And notice that this is actually a triangle EDC. And we also know that the property of the triangle is the sum of the angles would be equals to 180 degrees. So the sum of this, and this would be equals to 180 degrees. So to find the angle T is we do 180 degrees minus 47 minus 95 degrees. Because these two are the other two angles of the triangle. And if we calculate this correctly, we'll get 38 degrees. And we can also write down the final answer right here, 38 degrees. So again, this is a short answer question, and we just write the final answer here. I note here that they actually gave out the units in the short answer, but sometimes it's not always there. So please remember to write down important units when writing the final answer. And this is actually included in the marking scheme of the examinations. So just take note of that. So some examples of important units would be centimeters, meters, kilogram, as well as monetary units such as dollars and cents. And let's move on to question 27 now. And question 27, I will introduce a method called branching, which is part of heuristics, which is something special to Singapore's math education. And you can search this up online on what it is. It's basically several mathematical techniques to solve problems that are commonly seen in the Singapore's national examination for primary school, which is called PSLE. And now let's take a look at what the question is asking. Matthew donated 3/10 of his salary to charity, and he gave a fifth of his salary to his parents, and he spent 1/6 of his remaining salary and saved the rest. And what fraction of his salary did he save? This one is a bit more complicated question, and there's multiple steps to do this. The important part of this question is understanding exactly what the sentences mean. So firstly, we have Matthew donated 3/10 of his salary and gave 1/5 of his salary. And for this part, it's a bit simple. All we need to do is we subtract the whole amount of money he had at first. So at first he had 1, which is representing the original amount of money he had, and used 3/10 of that to charity and gave 1/5 also of his salary to his parents. So all we need to do here is subtraction. And to do subtractions of fraction, how we're going to do this is we're just going to, instead of doing this in one whole equation, I'm going to do this one by one. So I'm going to do 1 minus 3/10 of his salary first. And I'm going to convert this one into 10 over 10. So for subtraction and addition of fractions, please remember to equalize the denominators. And after we have equalized, we can just subtract as per normal. This is supposed to be a 3. And this will be equals to 7 over 10. So this is the amount remaining after he gave his salary to charity. And he also gave 1/5 of his original salary to his parents. So we also do this, and we want to convert this and equalize the denominators. So 1 over 5 is actually equals to 2 over 10. So if we want to go from 5 to 10, we multiply by 2. So we do the same for the numerator. We multiply by 2. So this will be equals to 7 over 10 minus 2 over 10, which is 5 over 10. And we can also simplify this into half. So 5 over 10 is the same as half. But we're not done yet. We actually need to also do this part right here. 1 over 6 of his remaining salary. Now this is the part where it gets a bit confusing, because this part is asking about the remaining salary, while the rest of the fractions, 3 over 10 and 1 over 5, is in reference to his original salary. So we're not just going to do a simple subtraction of 1 over 2 minus 1 over 6. This is wrong. We're actually going to have to do a multiplication. So 1 over 6 is in reference to his remaining salary. And after he has used 1 over 6 of his remaining salary, we would be left with 5 over 6 of his remaining salary, because this would be 1 minus 1 over 6. And the next question is what we're going to do with this 5 over 6. We're actually going to use this 5 over 6 and multiply it by our remaining salary, which is half of his original salary. So if he spent 1 over 6 of his remaining salary, he's left with 5 over 6 of his remaining salary. And we multiply that to whatever his remaining salary is, which is half. And this would give us 5 over 12, which is just basic multiplication of numerators and denominators independently. So 5 comes from 5 times 1, and 12 comes from 6 times 2. And before we write down the final answer as 5 over 12, notice here that we want to give our answer in the simplest form. So we need to first check if this is our simplest form. So is there any number that we can divide both numerator and denominator by such that it becomes simpler? And the answer is actually no. 5 over 12 is already the simplest we can have. Yeah, so this is an example of simplification. 5 over 10 to half is simplification. So notice that for 5 over 10, we can do 5 divided by 5 and 10 divided by 5. And that's how we got half. So our final answer would be 5 over 12. Okay, so now we can move on to paper 2, which is where we're actually allowed to use our calculators. And we're going to start off with question 1, which is a bit more difficult than the others. So this is a question about Mandy, who had twice as many books as Rose. And she gave 73 books to Rose. And after that, Mandy had 154 books more than Rose. Okay, so now we're going to use another heuristics method, which is called model method. So this is a very popular method among students because it's quite easy to understand. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to draw models to represent how many books each of them had. So at first, Mandy had twice as many books as Rose. So I'm going to draw a bar representing Mandy's books that is twice as long as Rose's books. So I'm also going to represent this as 1 unit. So U stands for units in primary school math, and it's also a common method. It's called unitary method. And so the total of Mandy's books would be equal to 2 units. And she gave 73 books to Rose. So Mandy actually gives out 73 books to Rose. So I'm just going to represent that in our bars, our model, basically. And after that, Mandy had 154 more books than Rose. So I'm going to basically draw out 73 books. So 73 books. So this 73 is given to Rose. And then what's left here is actually 154 based on the question. Because after she gave out this 73, Mandy would still have 154 books more than Rose. So this part is the excess books Mandy had as compared to Rose. And this will be very useful in finding out how much 1 unit actually is. So our goal is actually to find out how much 1 unit is. And notice that since this part here is 1 unit, and we know that Mandy had twice as much as Rose at first, this part here that I circled is actually also 1 unit. And we actually know the value of that because it's just the addition of these 3 numbers. So 1 unit is actually just 73 plus 154, 154 plus 73. And we can just use our calculator for this, but this should be equals to 300 books. 300 books. And yeah, so after we found out 1 unit, we can quite easily find what the question is asking, which is how many books did Mandy have at first? And Mandy actually had 2 units at first. So 2 units is actually just 2 times 300, which is 600 books. So we're going to write down 600 here, and I'm going to also write down the units, which is books. Now this books units is actually not a compulsory thing to do, but it's a good idea to just write down the units every time we write the final answer, because this helps us not forget when we actually need to write down important units such as centimeters, meters, and dollars. So instead of remembering which units are important and which are not, it's usually better to just write down all the units in the final answer. Okay, so now let's move on to our last question of the day, which is question 8. And this question is talking about square A and rectangle B, which overlaps each other in this shaded area right here. And we see here that the length of the square A is 18 centimeters. So this is 18 centimeters. So the property of a square is that each length is equal to one another. And we also know here that the area of rectangle B is 3 times the area of square A. So let's start doing question A immediately. And to do question A, we actually need to find out what the area of A is first. And this is quite simple. We just need to utilize the formula for the area of A, which is length times length. And since we know the length is 18, we can just do 18 times 18, which is 324. So this is the area of A. And the question is asking for area of B. And to get this area of B is using this information, which is the area of B is 3 times the area of square A. So all we need to do is we need to multiply this value right here by 3. So we get 324. And the final answer should be 972. Just a reminder that for paper 2, we are allowed to use our calculators. So no need to worry about calculating this manually. We can just plug it into our calculators. And now I'm going to write down 972 and centimeters squared. So this final unit is very important. So centimeters, centimeters squared, kilograms, and dollars are all important units, which will be penalized if the student forgets to write it down. So please remember to write it down in your papers. Okay, so now let's move on to question B, which is a bit difficult. So this is a ratio question, but I'm going to solve this using unitary methods, just like I did in question 1, because it's an easier way of solving the question. So in the question we have the ratio of the shaded area to the unshaded area of square A is 1 to 8. And what is the unshaded area of rectangle B? Okay, so the way we're going to do this question is I'm going to suppose that the shaded area is equals to 1 unit. So I'm going to suppose that shaded would be equals to 1 unit. So we don't know how much what's the value of this 1 unit is, but we're first going to expand our information based on what we know. And we know that the ratio between the shaded and the unshaded of A is 1 to 8. So we actually can find out how many units is the unshaded area of A. And this is actually equals to unshaded of A is equals to 8 units because the ratio is 1 to 8. So 1 to 8. And next is we're going to find out the area of A. And we actually know the exact value of that area from the previous question. But now we're going to first find out in terms of units. And if we take a look at the diagram, we can notice that the total area of A is actually just the addition of the shaded part by the unshaded part. So to get the total number of units, all we need to do is we add these two up, add these two together. So the area of A would just be the shaded part added up by the unshaded part. And this should give you 9 units. And just like I mentioned earlier that we already know the final value of our area of A. So I actually know that 9 units is equals to 324. And if we use our calculator, we can actually get that 1 unit would just be 36. And this is in terms of centimeter squared. And that's actually what the shaded area is. We know that the shaded is 1 unit. And since we know 1 unit is 36 centimeters squared, we know that the shaded is actually also 36 centimeters squared. And now we can actually find out what the unshaded area of rectangle B is. And because just like for the area of A, the total area for rectangle B is actually just the unshaded area of B, which is this part, added by the shaded part. So since we already know the shaded part and we also know the total area of B, we can find out what the area of the unshaded part is. And so all we need to do is subtract the total area of B by this 36. That's 972 centimeters squared minus 36 centimeters squared. And this should be equals to 936 centimeters squared. That's our final answer.